A fresh voice has joined the growing national debate over Constitutional Amendment Bill number 3 and the future of Zimbabwe's leadership. Veteran politician and Harare East legislator Honorable Kanan Zvidzai has delivered a firm message that is already generating discussion across the country. While acknowledging what he described as notable achievements under President Emerson Mnangagwa's administration, Zvidzai insists that extending the president's term of office is simply not an option. His argument is straightforward. Constitutional term limits exist for a reason. They protect democracy, they ensure accountability, and they guarantee the peaceful transfer of power. As Zimbabwe continues debating CAB3 and constitutional reforms, Zvidzai's intervention has added another important perspective to one of the country's most controversial political conversations. But why is he taking this position? Why are term limits becoming such a major issue? And what could the debate mean for Zimbabwe's future? Stay tuned. And before we continue, please subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications for daily Zimbabwe political news and analysis. Let's get into it.
Mr. President, as I debate, I don't intend to debate President Dr. Emerson Mnangagwa, who I believe has done much better than his predecessor in terms of delivery of certain components of our services. I do understand that President Mnangagwa has increased the GDP of this economy from a measly 20 or so to 57. That is something that we all should undoubtedly praise, applaud, and encourage. Mr. President, but let me not digress. Let me debate the bill. So I rise at this juncture to do exactly that. I rise from a standpoint, Mr. President, not merely of legal interpretation of the law. I'm not a lawyer, engineer. But from the standpoint of constitutionalism, democratic legitimacy, and sovereignty of the people of our beloved fatherland. At the heart of this debate, Mr. President, lies a simple but very profound question. Who owns the Constitution? Who owns this Constitution that we are being asked today to amend? The answer is not Parliament. It's not our Constitution as Parliament. It's not the executive that owns this Constitution. The Constitution, Mr. President, belongs to the people of Zimbabwe. Some who don't sit in these lofty offices, who are walking the streets and valleys and mountains of Chikuku, Zaka, Muroi, and places such as that. But they own this Constitution. Mr. President, our Constitution identifies among the founding values and principles the supremacy of the Constitution, democratic governance, and sovereignty of the people. All political authority, Mr. President, derives from nowhere except the people, and the people only. And this brings me to the years when ZAPU was formed, when President Robert Mugabe suggested the P in ZAPU to amplify the issue of people. So political authority, Mr. President, derives from the people and must be exercised in accordance to their will. Mr. President, the proponents of this bill argue that the Constitution does not expressly require a referendum before extending the tenure of elected officials. I am not walking that route. I don't intend to, because that's a law value. Law provides for minimums. Good governance does above the minimums. So the fact that the Constitution may not have provided, which is arguable for a referendum, and you stick to that, you are acting at the lower end of a value system. I would rather act at the higher end of a value system. The proponents rely on the letter of the law. However, constitutions, Mr. President, are not interpreted solely by their text. They are interpreted through their values, their purpose, and their spirit. Their values, their purpose, and the spirit. I know lawyers will say that's neither here nor there.
Zimbabwe's constitutional debate continues to intensify as political leaders, legal experts, civil society organizations, and ordinary citizens express differing views on Constitutional Amendment Bill number 3. The latest intervention comes from Honorable Kanan Zvidzai, who says that while government achievements should be acknowledged, constitutional principles must remain protected. According to Zvidzai, the question is not whether President Mnangagwa has delivered results in certain areas. The question is whether constitutional limits should be altered to allow an extension of executive authority. In his remarks, Zvidzai emphasized the importance of respecting constitutional term limits. He argued that constitutions are designed to provide stability and predictability within democratic systems. Without clear limits on political power, he warned, democratic institutions can become vulnerable to abuse and public confidence can begin to weaken. Term limits have long been one of the most important safeguards within modern democracies. Supporters argue that they prevent excessive concentration of power in the hands of a single individual and encourage political renewal through regular leadership transitions. Many constitutional scholars believe term limits help strengthen institutions by ensuring that no office holder becomes larger than the system itself. Zvidzai's comments come against the backdrop of an increasingly heated national conversation surrounding CAB3. Supporters of the bill argue that constitutional amendments are legitimate legislative tools that can help improve governance structures and address practical challenges facing the nation. Critics, however, continue expressing concerns about the long-term implications of certain proposed changes. According to Zvidzai, constitutional rules should not be adjusted simply because a particular leader is popular or because supporters wish to see that leader remain in office longer. He argues that democratic systems are strongest when institutions remain more important than individuals. For him, leadership transitions should occur according to constitutional provisions rather than political convenience. Political analysts say this argument resonates with a broader principle found in many democratic systems around the world. Strong democracies depend not only on elections, but also on respect for constitutional rules. When citizens trust that constitutional provisions will be honored, public confidence in institutions tends to increase. When those rules become subject of frequent controversy, political tensions can rise. At the same time, supporters of President Mnangagwa often point to development projects, infrastructure investments, economic reforms, and diplomatic engagement as evidence that the current administration has delivered meaningful progress. Some believe continuity in leadership can help maintain momentum on long-term national programs. Others argue that constitutional reforms should be viewed separately from debates about individual leaders. This difference of opinion helps explain why the CAB3 discussion has become so divisive. One side emphasizes institutional safeguards and constitutional principles. The other focuses on governance outcomes, development priorities, and the practical realities of national leadership. Both perspectives continue shaping public debate. For many Zimbabweans, the issue goes beyond politics. It touches on fundamental questions about the future of the nation. How should power be transferred? What safeguards are necessary to protect democratic governance? And how can Zimbabwe balance stability with accountability? These are questions that citizens across the political spectrum continue asking. Observers note that term limits are often among the most sensitive constitutional issues because they directly affect the relationship between leaders, institutions, and citizens. Throughout Africa and beyond, debates over presidential term limits have frequently generated intense political discussions. Zimbabwe is now experiencing its own version of that debate. Zvidzai's intervention therefore represents more than a personal opinion. It reflects a broader conversation taking place across the country, a conversation about constitutionalism, a conversation about democratic governance, and a conversation about how Zimbabwe should navigate its future political path. As CAB3 continues moving through legislative processes and public discussions, voices from both sides are expected to become even louder. Supporters will continue defending the proposed reforms. Critics will continue raising concerns. And citizens will continue evaluating the arguments presented by political leaders. For now, one thing is clear. Honorable Canon Zvidzai has taken a firm position. He acknowledges achievements where he sees them, but he insists that constitutional term limits must remain intact. Whether Zimbabwe ultimately agrees with that position remains to be seen. But his remarks have ensured that the debate over democracy, accountability, and the peaceful transfer of power remains firmly in the national spotlight. Do you agree with Hon? Canon Zvidzai that constitutional term limits should never be altered, regardless of a leader's performance? Or do you believe exceptional circumstances can justify constitutional changes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this report, please subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications for daily Zimbabwe political news and analysis. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.